Thank you so much. There we go. I'm talking with mute on, so thanks for letting me know, Mr. Meows. So just wanted to say hi again to everyone, to Jean, Ingrid, Janie, Morris, Joey, Debbie. Hopefully you can hear me now. Mr. Meowpoos. Presenting for results. Hopefully you guys can hear me now. Just let me know in the comments if you can hear me. I did have my microphone unmuted. Now, yay! So you can hear me now. That's good. Sorry about that. I've got too many things on the screen to know. So this WPQuickies is all about staging servers or staging sites, so that you can let your clients view and interact with your development, or maybe if you just want to test some things out. And so today's topic was suggested by Jonathan Cooper. So thanks, Jonathan. Hopefully you're on board for this one this afternoon. And before we get started, just make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell just to get notified of our next videos. Good. Everyone's saying, oh, Robin. Yep, you should be able to hear me, Robin. I am talking, I'm all unmuted, so make sure that your speaker's on. Everyone else seems to be able to get that, so that's great. Thanks very much. Okay, let's get into it because there's quite a lot to cover today. Okay, so why use a staging site at all? Well, there's a couple of reasons that I can think off the top of my head. First one is, as I mentioned previously, if you're a designer or a developer and you want to get some feedback on your development from the customer, then obviously you can't let them see your local machine, or even if you could, that's probably not a good idea from a security advantage. So you're going to need a separate server, a separate instance where they can log in, they can have a look at the stuff, give you feedback, and somewhere that you can upload designs every so often, just to kind of keep them in that feedback loop. So yeah, definitely staging server is very useful for that. But also, if you've got like a large production site and you want to make some updates, maybe to a new WordPress version, or perhaps as a major plugin update that's been done, it's quite useful to have a separate like staging area that you can copy the production environment onto, do all your updates, and just make sure that things are okay, and if there's any issues that you have a plan to be able to get those things fixed. Yeah, so staging site is really, really useful. I think everyone at some point is probably going to need one, especially with WordPress. You'll have seen with WordPress 5.5, that was a huge update and quite a lot of things broke. So it's always useful to have a staging site just to test these things on, and then you can replicate that staging site back to production, or you can write down your checklist on how to go about updating the production server. Okay, so first of all, there's many ways to set up a staging site for client access, and many web hosting providers now provide like a one-click staging environment, and that'll copy what you've currently got on your production, and it'll copy over into a specific staging area. And so definitely check with your WordPress hosting provider and see if they give this option, because if they do, then that's great. You don't have to do anything else for that. So some of the popular WordPress hosting providers, such as WP Engine, Kinetics, Kinsta, even SiteGround on some of their packages, they'll provide a free staging area for existing websites. And they have varying levels of ease of use in creating them. Definitely check that out first, and check to see if your existing provider does give you a staging area. Next, so once you've got a staging area, where do you put the staging files? And this is maybe more if you're doing it manually, if you're copying to a manual one, because the web hosting providers that provide a staging area, they usually have a one-click or a wizard that allows you to go through that. So this is if you're creating your own staging server, a separate website, where do you put the files? Well, I like to host my staging sites away from the production server, as it could negatively affect performance. I know that some people create staging sites as subfolders or subdirectories in a production site. So I tend not to do that, just for the very reason that, something could go wrong. and that would affect your production server performance. So keep it into a separate website, separate account for doing that. I use a DigitalOcean droplet server. So that's digitalocean.com. And I point the staging site at a subdomain on that site. And I do that by installing new WordPress instances in subfolders, and then pointing the A record of the DNS to that particular web instance, that WordPress instance. So for example, I will give my client something like their name. So for example, in the screen here, it's just my client one, and then .mystagingserver.com. So mystagingserver.com, that would be my domain name that I have my staging server at. And then I just create WordPress sites on that server, and then give them a name, a URL as a client one or client two, or whatever their name is, .mystagingserver.com. So separate website installs, and you can do that with Apache or Nginx to install that. And this is more a hands-on approach. This is like a more manual approach when you're installing this. But something else I've discovered. Oh, sorry, the DigitalOcean ones are really, really cheap. They're like $5 US a month to have like a whole server, a whole physical server that you can install lots of WordPress instances onto. So pretty cheap. But I found something else. Recently, I've been talking to the guys at Wordify, and Wordify.com, if you've not heard of it, they tend to do WordPress websites more for designers and developers, because they don't have the whole hosting panel, cPanel, or Plesk. So you kind of maybe need to know a little bit about what you're doing here. But yeah, they give free staging sites. Okay, there's a little bit of a limit. I think there's a 2 GB file limit, but unlimited number of free staging sites. And there's also an option to choose an Australian data center. So definitely check them out. I mean, this is a whole website and it's hosted absolutely free for you. It's fantastic. So I really do applaud these guys at Wordify.com. So I'll drop that in there. All the websites are password protected, and that's really good. And we'll get into that in a little bit later. But I'm just going to drop a link in here. It's a shameless plug. It is an affiliate link. You don't pay anything extra, but I get a little bit of commission for mentioning them. Or you can just go through wordify.com. It's totally up to you. But definitely check them out. See what they're all about. Here's the options that you have when you create a free account with unlimited developer sites. So you got an overview. I'll make that a little bit bigger. You get an overview of the site, which tells you the URL, the IP address, the FTP username and password, WordPress version. You can choose to auto update on there. And then you've got all the WordPress admin stuff, so you can have a look at what's installed there. There's SFTP, so secure FTP that you can upload all your files to. You've got config, which is great because there's no cPanel or Plesk. There's no file manager. But what they do is they have this config area that loads in the WP config, and you can change all these different variables just by clicking on edit. So you don't ever have to muck around with the config file. And of course, you can see themes and plugins, and this is all from the Wordify dashboard. So you can update all these things just from that dashboard. So definitely give them a go. I think it's great. A free staging site for them, and it's really easy to move all your files up and down from there. So yeah. Okay, so protecting your site. So when you're setting up a staging site for a customer, it's absolutely critical to use password protected directory that contains your staging site. So if you're doing it manually, make sure that you password protect that folder. You can do it on SSH, or you can do it on File Manager in Plesk and cPanel as well. So the basic password protection is all you need, and it really means that you're protecting that from Google. So you don't want Google to index a staging site because it's going to find duplicate content, and you're going to get into a whole heap of trouble with the client. Now, I know a lot of people leave it open and they check this in the settings readings, discourage search engines from indexing the site. I hate to use that option within WordPress because a lot of times a lot of people forget to uncheck it when they go back to production, and Google just doesn't index the whole site. So I like to password protect my staging sites, password protect the directory, and that stops Google from reading it. But also, another important fact is you could be opening yourself up to a contractual dispute for commercial confidentiality and intellectual property rights if you're exposing your client's materials to competitors online. So yeah, have a think about that. So password protect your staging site, I think, is very, very important. Next, show your clients how to access the staging site. So don't just go and create a staging site and give them a link, because a lot of times it's a different process, especially if they're getting another password box that comes up before the WordPress login. They might not understand this whole idea of password protecting the directory. So every time I create a staging site for a customer, then I just create a little video that just shows them, I screen capture my browser, a little video as to how I go about it and explain what pops up. So here's the first password box, and here's the username and password used for here. And then you go into your WordPress login, and here's username and password. So it really just explains them, to show them how to use the staging site, how to access it. Okay, so cloning your WordPress development site. So if you've got an existing site on your local machine, if you're a developer, or if you're taking a production copy, how are you going to do that? So it's great if your host provides a one-click install, but if not, then WordPress, it's just a collection of files and a database, so it's pretty easy to move to another location. What I like to do is manually zip all the files, so everything in the WP content folder, zip them all up, and then SFTP, that's secure FTP, them up to the new server where the staging site is, and then just extract them onto the server, just unzip them onto the server. So moving the files is really, really, really easy. So when it comes to the database, some people get a bit stuck with this, but there's a few tools that you can use for that. The best tool I like to use is WP Migrate DB. Now they have a pro version, and that helps you to do the content, and also it can actually push the SQL up to the new server, so you don't have to do all this FTPing around. But essentially what it allows you to do is on your local site, you go into the plugin and you put in the new URL, so that would be your staging site URL, and export the database into an SQL file. So you can upload the SQL file into your staging site using phpMyAdmin if you've got access to that, or if not, then you can. There's a phpMyAdmin plugin as well that you can use to do that. Yep. So get your files up using SFTP. Export the SQL out of your local or production site into the new staging site URL, and can use it that way. So definitely that's an easy way. Or a lot of people use this duplicator plugin as well. Personally, I've not used it, but I know a lot of people who copy sites from local up to staging sites, they use it. And it's a similar process where it asks you for the new URL of the site, and it goes and it changes all the URLs in the database and gives you files. And I think the pro version as well actually pushes it up to the new server using SFTP as well. So really easy cloning your website, and I've got heaps of resources on my website, zeropointdevelopment.com, that will show you how to move a WordPress website to a new location, so you can have a look at those. Yeah, so changing the URLs in the database, this is really important if you're moving sites. So if you go into a staging server, you're going to have a different URL. So make sure that you use a plugin which changes the URL in the database. Don't try and do it manually. There's particular data in there called serialized data, and that stores data from your widgets, your menus, and other things throughout your WordPress site. So if you try and change URLs manually using Notepad or a file editor, then it's going to knock all those out and you're going to lose all that data. So make sure you use a plugin when you're changing URLs in the database. You can, of course, use WordPress CLI as well if you're a developer. There's a WP CLI that allows you to change all the URLs in database as well. So have a look at that if you're a developer. Copying the files. Well, as I mentioned before, I like to zip them all up and SFTP them up to the new site, and then I can use Plesk or cPanel with the file manager to extract them. I use as well, there's an application I use on Windows, which is called WinSCP. I don't think it's on Mac, but definitely on Windows. It's got heaps of options that allows you to move files up and extract them onto the remote host as well. Good. If you are on the Mac, then you can get FTP apps or web browser extensions as well, and that can do the same job. So the database as well, and just a little bit more on the database. So databases, they have SQL language. So when you export the data from the database, it exports it into a file called an SQL file. So what you can do is you can take that, move it to the staging server, go into PHPMyAdmin. From there, from within cPanel or Plesk, or you, as I said, you can download the plugin, the PHPMyAdmin extension plugin, and then go into your WordPress website, into the PHP area, and it loads up PHPMyAdmin as you would normally see it. And then you just import that SQL file into your database, and you've got all those settings, and it should be good to go. If you are using that plugin, that PHPMyAdmin plugin, remember to remove it afterwards, because it is a pretty dangerous tool to keep on any server. People can play around with it. Okay, next, for developers. So WordPress 5.5, if you've migrated, 5.5.1 came out last week, so yeah, definitely upgrade to that. But they've got a new function called WP Get Environment Type, and it allows you to, if you're a developer, to run different code depending on what environment you're in. So you could define your WordPress website that's running on your staging site as having a staging site environment. And that means you can run different tests and different code against that environment. So a really, really handy new addition, new feature that's in WordPress 5.5 I think developers and designers will really love. Okay, just a note on page builders. So moving a WordPress website from one location to the other is just files in a database, and that is super simple to do once you've got the hang of it. But if you're using page builders, you need to do an extra step for those. And I found this out. I've just started using page builders in Anger over the last 6 months. I used to develop all my themes manually or using Genesis. But yeah, so if you're using page builders, the way that the page builders are working is when you're designing a page layout, it actually creates a separate style sheet for each page and stores that in one of the folders in your uploads folder. And that actually stores all the URLs. So if you're doing stuff on your local machine, it's going to store your local machine URL against that style sheet, which means when you upload all those files to the staging site, it's still got your local URL in it. So there's a couple of things you need to do with page builders. Here's an Elementor one. So for example, Elementor has tools. So once you've moved all the sites using FTP, you go into the staging site, you go into Elementor in the settings, and there's a tool that allows you to rename URLs within all those files that Elementor uses for style sheets. And Beaver Builder, it's got a similar system. It's a little bit easier. So once you move all the Beaver Builder files up to the staging server, you go into Beaver Builder, into the settings, and you clear the cache. And that forces Beaver to rebuild all those files with the staging site URL in that. And these are processes you're going to need to do when you move that staging site back into production or into production for the first time. You have to mimic all these designs. So of course, once you've moved the files, the database, and all the page builder stuff, if you've got that, don't assume that everything went okay. Definitely for staging sites, make sure you have a good look around the website. before you let your clients loose on that. Because there's nothing more embarrassing than doing all this stuff, sending them the URL with a video, and then they log in and stuff's missing or it's not working the way you expect. So when you're creating a staging site, definitely have a checklist procedure that you go through and just make sure that things are on that site that are on your local machine or that you expect the customer to find. So yeah, definitely create a checklist for that. So I know, guys, I've really zoomed through this, and for some of you, it might be a little bit of an alien topic, but hopefully I've covered the basics to allow you to see how you could create a staging site, the things that you need to do to replicate a WordPress site from your local or from production. And definitely check out the wordify.com guys. I mean, giving away free staging servers, that's just fantastic, really, really good. Yeah, and it takes away from all your having to look after its own server, like the DigitalOcean servers. You know, I've got to look after those servers. I've got to upgrade the Linux version, or the version of Ubuntu. I've got to upgrade Apache, MySQL, Nginx, install malware scanners and firewalls to make sure people don't hack the actual server itself. So having your staging site on a company that looks after all that stuff is absolutely top notch. I think that saved a lot of time and effort, especially for me. Okay, guys, happy to take questions if you want to post them down in the comments below. Otherwise, we've covered that in good time. Next week, a lot of you guys have asked for this on webhooks. So we were talking about WooCommerce a couple of quickies ago, and we're talking about webhooks. I just kind of glanced on webhooks and people were quite interested in that. So next week, I'm going to run a WP Quickie just telling you what basically webhooks are, what they're used for, how you can use them, how you can test them as well. And I'll kind of focus on a couple of the WooCommerce webhooks just to show you how you can extend and build and do cool things with webhooks. So hopefully you guys will look forward to that one next week. It is a little bit more of a techie talk. I've been focusing a lot more on beginner talks in my quickies, but this one is definitely kind of just above the beginner level, just above there. But hopefully it will entice you to extend that a little bit more. Michelle, what about using something like local by Flywheel? And can you back up on local by Flywheel? Yes, you can, Michelle. I've used local quite a few times. And for those of you who don't know what local is, there's a company called flywheel.com, and they're up there with WP Engine. In fact, they were bought by WP Engine last year, but still remain a separate brand. They have this little tool called Local that you download onto your local machine. Whether it's Windows, Linux, or Apple Mac, they all work on all three variants. And it basically allows you to create a whole WordPress web server on your local machine that you can have HTTPS on there, so it's all secure and it's all in its own little environment. And yeah, so they've got some features in local that allows you to upload a website all the way up into the Flywheel account. So if you've got an account with Flywheel with sharing hosting there, then you can just press a button and it'll move your local site all the way up to whatever site you choose on the flywheel.com. But they do have an export feature as well. So within Flywheel, within local by Flywheel, you can export your whole site and it exports out to the files and the database. So yes, Michelle, you can do exactly the same thing with Flywheel, local by Flywheel, just exporting that data out onto your machine and then moving it up into your staging site. Great question. Oh, yep, you're welcome. Presenting for results. I don't know what your real name is, but yep. Jean, if a staging site gets indexed by Google by accident, how would you remove it from the Google index? Okay, well, you need to go into the Google Search Console for that particular domain. And then you would need to request removal of all those pages, like all of them. This is why it's such a bad idea to let a staging site loose on the website. Fine if it's a small site and you've got a few pages indexed, but can you imagine if you've got a client that's got 1,000 pages or WooCommerce products and it's picking up the shop? It's an absolute nightmare. But that's the only way you can do it, is to go into the Google Search Console and request Google to remove one page from its index. So that's a really time-consuming thing to do. So it's just best not to do that in the first place. Yeah, but great question, Jean. Thank you. Julia, how about using WP all-in-one migration? Yep, you can use that one again. It's very similar to the duplicator plugin. So all these plugins do something similar. At the end of the day, what I outlined before is WordPress is just a collection of PHP files and a database. So it actually is super easy to move around. And this all-in-one migration, that does that as well. And I think for the paid version, it actually pushes it up onto the staging server using SFTP all by itself, so you don't have to manually move things around. So yeah, that'd be a good choice as well, Julia. Yeah. Joey, currently using AMP. Yep, so that's the Apple Mac one, isn't it? So the Mac and the AMP is for Apache, MySQL, and PHP for testing. Not really as a staging site though. No, it's good for getting on your local machine. Certainly have a look at Flywheel, because MAMP's still a little bit more on the manual side, whereas Local by Flywheel does a lot of that stuff that you'd have to configure for MAMP. It's so much easier to use. Maurice, if still developing the site, is it a bad idea to develop on that staging site and then once all done, upload into the final domain? No, that's not a bad idea at all. You can do all the development on the staging site, as long as you make your customer or client aware that something could go wrong. Like when I'm developing a website, if I'm writing PHP or whatever, then at some point along the line, I'm going to cause, a PHP fatal error, which is going to make the screen go white. If it really depends on what you're trying to do. I like to do all my development on local and then push up to a staging site, just because when I've created like a version, just say it's a version 0.02, I push that up and then I know that what the customer is looking at is that version and it's not changing. Whereas if the customer's in there interacting, creating posts, looking at products, maybe updating their subscription, going through the workflow, if you're adding to that while they're testing, then that's going to cause an issue with their testing. So I do like to keep them separate. I like to do my development on one instance. It doesn't have to be on your local machine. You can have like a separate site up there, but then let the customers access on one fixed site that they know that's what it is. And so when they give you your feedback, you do a new design, then push that up to the staging server, and they know that they've got this new framework that they need to change, and it won't change until I update a new version. Damien, when I've used Duplicator in the past, it required an empty target directory. Right, okay. Is it a pro feature? Yep, I don't know for sure. I've not used Duplicator myself. I've just heard other people say it's really good, but that could be a requirement. It could be that it requires an empty directory to do that, because I know that overwriting files can be a bit difficult and complicated sometimes. So it could be, yeah, it's a good question, Damien, but sorry, I don't have that exact answer for you because I don't use that Duplicator plugin. Okay, guys, thank you so much for those questions. That's really, really good. I'm going to call it a day because it went a little bit over half past, just a few minutes. If you've got any more ideas and topics, there's a link below the video here to a Google form, and just fill out some more suggestions as to what you think you'd like me to cover in WP Quickies, and I'll queue them up over the next few weeks and get those done. And don't forget to connect with me if you've got any questions outside of here. Yeah, don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Twitter. And I can follow up some of the questions if you've got like a bigger question that you want to hit me with. Happy to do that. If you're connecting with me on LinkedIn, just remember to leave a little message, a little note, just to say where you're coming from, because I do get lots of random connections every day. And so yeah, drop me a note to say that you watch them on the WP Quickies, and I'm happy to connect with you there, guys. Last question, then I'll go. If using a service like Wordify staging server, does the process of pushing the site to production update all the URLs? Yes, if you're using the staging site on Wordify and you have a Wordify Pro account, a paid account, then yes, you can clone or migrate that staging server off into their account. Otherwise, you're going to need to do the same process that you moved your local site onto the staging server. So again, you need to copy all the files from your staging server onto production, and then you need to export the database with the new URL, and then move that database file into the production server database using phpMyAdmin or WP CLI. Thanks, Ingrid. And thank you very much, guys. Thanks for joining me. Thank you for listening to me waffle on. And I will call it a day and see you guys next week. Ta-ta.